Hi, this is Mark Marshall with Anatomy of Tone. In this YouTube video, I'm going to talk about the methods you'll need to make learning music theory easier. So, music theory can be a daunting task when it comes to approaching and trying to figure out the best methods for learning it. Now, I started out being self-taught and I learned a lot about maybe what not to learn first from learning music theory. Years later, I finally started studying with somebody and I had acquired a lot of music theory. I was able to do that, but I think when I was teaching myself, I sometimes tended to learn things out of order from where I would have now if I went back in time was able to do it. So one of the things that can make learning music theory easier is to study with a teacher. I know I'm a music teacher and it sounds like I'm just trying to siphon people into taking lessons with me, which I am available to teach, subtle plug, but also it's not really about that. It's not even about taking lessons with me. It's about taking lessons with somebody that can be a coach for you or just a spotter. Even if you're teaching yourself, you can check in with them and they can make sure that you're on the right path or you're learning things in the right order. Because what happens when we're educating ourselves is sometimes we ended up learning step 5 before step 3, and that can make things confusing. And if we don't have a straight line while we're learning these things, it can feel a lot more complicated than it is, because most music theory is simple in concept. It's not always easy in application or in delivery in the way that people try to teach music theory. So I wrote a book called Practice Makes Progress, and my philosophy behind this book was to make music theory as accessible as possible. What happens sometimes when you're learning music theory is that it feels a little bit like an exclusive club that you can't get into, but how do you get into it if you don't learn music theory? And I wanted to break that down and make it accessible for everybody. So learning from an instructor is number one. Now, number two, study the music theory that's related to the type of music that you like. This is a big one. I think a lot of musicians feel pressure that they're supposed to understand more about modes than maybe they may be interested in. I love music theory. I know a lot about modes and chord scales and all that stuff, but it doesn't always apply to every type of music that you're playing, right? So if your thing is maybe a country music, or if it's like punk, or I don't know, there's certain genres of music that aren't using the Phrygian mode, for instance, right? Or they're not using Lydian dominant. And so learning those things isn't necessarily going to help you at first. I'm not saying it's bad to learn it. More knowledge is more power. So the more that you can learn is the better. But it might not be the best start of attack, right? Best plan to get going is to be learning things that you don't have an association with. So if you're listening to punk and say you like Black Flag or something, learning the theory that is behind putting that music together is going to be more valuable to you in the immediate time because you can relate to it. These are sounds that you hear. You can associate it with a musical theory concept, which is important. Having an association is super important. Another thing I will talk about is knowing the notes on your instrument. I have students that come to me for lessons and they don't know the notes on their instrument. This happens more with guitar players and bass players than it does with piano players, but occasionally it happens. It happens a lot with guitar players. They just don't know. They use octaves to maybe find some of the notes on the guitar, but they can't just say where every note is. And this is a hindrance when it comes to trying to understand and apply music theory. So take the time to study the notes on the guitar and know them, and don't see frets, see notes. I don't see frets. I don't see fret 6, fret 7. I see B flat notes and A notes and F notes and whatever I'm on. You would call them frets, but I see actual pitches, and this makes applying music theory so much easier, and it'll just make your journey way more pleasurable. Practicing music theory. Now, you do have to practice music theory. It's not a situation where you just hear it once and then it's gone. So I practice a lot of music theory concepts on paper. I have a pen and paper. Using pen and paper will actually commit anything that you're studying or writing more to memory than using a digital device will. So it's just been scientifically proven. So when I'm learning something new, I'm still using a pen and paper to imprint in my brain. So say I'm trying to learn a new mode, or I'm trying to learn the notes that are in a scale. I work that out with pen and paper, and then I try to visualize it in my head later on. It's a stronger bond that way, but I practice music theory a lot. Like I learned, when I learned counterpoint, I should say, like I studied a lot and practiced it a lot on paper on a daily basis. I had some time put away just so I could work through various exercises to strengthen my knowledge and make sure that that information became more and more accessible, meaning I was faster at recalling it. So practicing music theory is really important. You have to make it a part of your life. You have to try to find a way to enjoy it so you can embrace it until you basically get to a point that you've overlearned it. Start ear training as early as possible. Ear training is probably the number one most important skill for being a musician because we're in the sound arts. So if we don't develop a taste for sound or a recognition for sound, nothing else really makes sense, because everything we're learning about music theory are essentially just recipes to be able to create desired sounds, right? So we want to get the sound of bebop. So then we have certain recipes in order to create those sounds. Training your ear to be able to hear those things is going to enable you to learn music theory faster, because again, it's another associative tool to be able to connect theory to something you already know, which will be sound. So practicing intervals, learning scales to be able to sing them against the drone so that you can hear, and modes. You should be able to sing a mode against the drone note and be able to hear each individual step. Recognizing chord cycles without touching your instrument. These are all super important skills. Consistency is key. Sometimes when students learn music theory, I notice that they'll practice for a day and take a couple of days off and then pick it up again and drop it again, and it's not very helpful to do that. So even if you're just practicing a small amount per day, making sure that you're keeping it at the forefront of your mind is important. So it's there on a regular basis. Also, when you learn a new concept, the first couple of days are really crucial to printing it in your brain. Last thing you want to do is read something, learn something, take a lesson, and then take a couple of days off where you're not reviewing that material. Those first couple of days, amongst all the days, are the most important. So make sure that when you're learning a new concept, you drill it the first couple of days, especially hard, then regularly. I don't mean you have to spend X amount extra time, but just make sure that you don't skip a day when you first learn something. Always review it, even if it's a short period of time, and then continue on after that. If you take a day off here and there, it's not a big deal, but you have to be fairly consistent about it to just keep creating building blocks really on this stuff. It's also important to start as simply as you can. This is where having a teacher is helpful, because they've been through the process and they can look and say, well, this is going to be step one for you, and make sure that you don't get lost or confused or taken on a detour, which happens sometimes. So, understanding the musical alphabet and the notes on the staff. I do think reading music is incredibly important. I know there was a backlash for a period of time about reading music square. People thought somehow it held you back or it was just uncool, but I encourage you to forget about that. Learning how to read music is going to just make learning music theory faster. It's another associative tool, but also there are unlimited resources for studying material in the future, for writing down your ideas, for visualizing parts that you have to memorize. It's just such a valuable tool. There are some new visual interactive tools which are really great. There are apps that allow you to be quizzed on the notes on the staff, as well as ear training. They'll play a note or an interval and make you guess what that interval is or what that chord is. There's apps for training you on reading rhythms. There's some really great technologies. Although I said work out music theory on paper, which I believe in, you can also, in addition to that, add in using some new interactive tools to do that. So Always applying the theory to your instrument is very important. If you're a guitar player, make sure that when you're learning a theoretical concept that you pick up your instrument, even if it's a short period of time, and you run through those concepts. I always start things with the key of C. I feel like it's a great home base before you start worrying about transposing it, moving it to the key of E flat or something. Just working every new theoretical concept out, starting in the key of C, is going to be your friend. If we can have a solid understanding of it in the key of C, then we're going to be able to understand it in any other key. The amount of information that you can absorb in a time is not quite as large, I think, as some people may expect it to be. So we believe in studying smaller pieces of information, chunking them, as opposed to trying to take in too much information at a time. One new theoretical concept can be enough to give you enough fuel for studying for several days. So don't feel like you have to cram a lot in there. Cramming too much information in at a time actually slows the process down. It may not seem like it at first, but you will actually make faster progress if you're taking smaller bits of information in at a time. Music theory involves memorization, so if you can study the art of memorization or mnemonics or memory aids that you can use to help you remember things, that is always great. And, for even memorizing the notes on the staff or the string, or just even other things that you're going to need to memorize. Just having an overview of how to use mnemonics and other memorization techniques can really help you along the process as well, because you'll be able to organize them in your brain better. I think it's important to set achievable goals. There are long-term goals which we can write down. I'm a big fan of keeping a journal and writing your goals down. I have a list for goals and another list for weaknesses, meaning where I think that I need to get better at. And the goal list is, what do I want to be able to do in a year or 6 months, right? So the big goal list is more like long-term future. But I have much smaller goal lists as well, which are just dealing with more immediate stuff. So I'm not overwhelming myself. And I want to set up like achievable, simple goals, because we want to feel like we're making progress. If you're setting too difficult of a goal at first, you're going to get frustrated. If you don't know anything about music theory and then you want to learn how to play over Coltrane changes, you're going to end up with a lot of frustration, because it's a lot to take in, period, let alone if you don't have a grasp on music theory. So start small, and maybe your one goal is like making sure that you know the notes on the low E string in a week, right? And the next week is knowing the notes on the A string on the guitar, or some week it could be I'm only going to learn the notes of E Phrygian, or what the Phrygian mode is that week. Or just like, see what I'm saying, it's just like small chunks that we can look at and say, well, I'm just going to focus on this topic, and then I can achieve that goal, and within like 30, 60 days is about what it actually takes to really imprint something into your memory to get to a point where it's like second nature. So we want to break down our big goals. I would like to play over Coltrane changes. Obviously, that's a long term, down to smaller bits. We have to understand scales. We have to understand chord progressions, right? So there's other small bits of information that we're going to string together in order to get to that big goal. I think you have to have patience when you're learning music theory. That's a big one. It's going to be frustrating, and there are things or moments that are going to confuse you. There's going to be some times where you're like, okay, I totally understand what's going on. Then you're going to walk away for 20 minutes and come back and be like, I have no idea what's going on. Like, sometimes it just completely confuses you, and that's just the nature of it. It happens to me. There's been a few topics with music theory I've had to just keep going back to my mentors and being like, wait a minute, just clarify this. Transposing for saxophone, either from the saxophone to the piano or the piano to the saxophone, for me, twisted my brain. I don't know what it was. Other people have such an easier time with it, but it took me a bit until I could make a strong association. I had to have a visualization of like, say, the alto sax. For me, I have this saying in my head where the saxophone, you are the sixth, right? Because the alto sax is actually an up a major sixth from the piano. So I have to say that to myself. I've created a visualization of it almost being like one of those, the weakest link. If you ever remember that TV show, which I never watched, but I remember the saying, and it's like, you are the sixth. So it's corny, but somehow I'm remembering it, and it really helped clarify that in my brain. So time, right? Patience. It is going to take time to learn music theory. Enjoy the experience. Music is a lifelong journey. It's a process. You're never going to arrive. You're going to arrive at different tiers, and you're going to have successes and accomplishments, but you're always going to be feeding your brain more and trying to grow your skill set. So take it slow, be consistent, and enjoy it. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion on the methods you'll need to make learning music theory easier. I'm available for conversations if you want to discuss it more at anatomyofguitartone.com. If you're enjoying these videos, please hit the subscribe button. I'll be releasing many more in this series on music theory, guitar playing, guitar tone, composition, a lot of different topics regarding guitar and music.